Hi, I'm Dr. Zeest Khan, the Long COVID MD. I'm a physician with Long COVID, and I've applied all of my medical expertise to my recovery. Luckily, it's working, and I want to share what I've learned with you. On this podcast, I help you understand your body and understand the healthcare system so you can move your own health forward. We've got a lot to talk about, but remember, nothing I say here replaces personalized medical advice from your healthcare team. Let's get started. Today, I'm going to talk about RECOVER-TLC. RECOVER-TLC was a seminar that was held a couple of weeks ago in Washington, D.C., hosted by the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease. On this podcast, I do like to focus on practical resources that you can use to improve your function after having long COVID. But I do think that it's important that you know what is happening on the funding level and research level as a whole as it pertains to long COVID. And so today, that's why I want to help explain the importance of RECOVER-TLC, summarize what was said and who was there, and discuss the implications that this seminar has on the future of long COVID research. To fully tell the story of RECOVER-TLC, I've got help. On this episode, you're not only going to hear my voice, you're going to hear the voice of researchers and patients who were involved or followed RECOVER-TLC. We've got a lot to cover, and you're going to be a lot more in the know by the time this episode is done. Let's get started. It makes sense to review RECOVER itself. RECOVER is the name of the federal initiative that is intended to research long COVID and ultimately come up with a cure. It's the umbrella foundation or initiative under which most federal funding for long COVID research falls. RECOVER is an acronym that stands for Researching COVID to Enhance Recovery. Up until recently, the RECOVER program has been under the purview of the National Institutes of Health, but it has been a pretty loose department. RECOVER has been sort of overseen by several departments that are affiliated with or report to the NIH. What has happened recently is that RECOVER has found a home in the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease, NIAID. It's also referred to as NIAID. There are a few reasons that this is important. One, RECOVER now has a boss. There is a director who, the buck stops with. The director of NIAID is Dr. Jean Marazzo. She's a physician and a scientist who has dedicated her career to studying infectious diseases, including HIV. She attended the entire meeting. NIAID hosted the meeting, and she is going to be very influential in determining the way future RECOVER resources are going to be distributed. The way she thinks about long COVID is going to be a huge factor in whether or not we find, reliable treatments to this disease. It's also someone who is going to get specific and focused backlash if the funds are not used effectively or efficiently. So there is some really new ways of accountability for RECOVER funds. The second important point of RECOVER finding a home at NIAID is NIAID itself. NIAID has extensive experience in infectious diseases and the immune system, and those two things are very central to understanding long COVID. NIAID has led research on viral infections like HIV, influenza, and COVID-19 itself. NIAID also specializes in something called translational research. That phrase was used quite a bit both in the titles of people presenting and in the discussion topics. Translational research is a branch of science that tries to apply laboratory findings to clinical treatments. It's basically, how do we find clinical relevance to the findings that we discover in the laboratory, which for long COVID is particularly important. Translational research requires a lot of creativity. It also benefits from collaboration. And that was another theme at RECOVER-TLC. There are so many agencies involved in research. There are many academic centers involved. There are also private sector resources at play and at work. How can we bring all of this information together to really utilize the disparate science that we're learning in different corners and apply it to improve patients' function and maybe find a cure? And then the last thing to know in general about RECOVER is that there are still hundreds of millions of dollars in RECOVER funding left to be used. However, that is much smaller than the money that has already been spent, and it's going to require a pretty aggressive political push to renew these funds and to keep long COVID research funded for a very long time. It seems quite apparent that it's going to take quite a bit of time to get really definitive answers. There is hope, however, in replicating the successes of HIV research in the long COVID space. So that's the hope. So that's the context of RECOVER funding and RECOVER-TLC. It lasted 2.5 days. They were long days of panel discussions and fielding questions from the audience. There was a live seminar, but it was also live streamed, and some of the panelists presented remotely. Like I said, it was live streamed, but if you did not sit and watch the full 2.5 days in real time, I don't blame you. Luckily, I know somebody who did. John Douglas is a computer scientist in his 30s who was diagnosed with long COVID a few years ago. Since his diagnosis, he has remained busy. He has written a book about his experience with long COVID. I'm going to link that below. He has also dedicated a lot of time to sharing research publications about long COVID. Like you, he wants to know the latest research and wants to keep abreast of new developments. And he has a really cool Twitter platform where he shares what he's learning. He uses algorithms that he has created to search research platforms for reasonably reliable research on long COVID. And then he shares that on his Twitter account with a really helpful summary. So if you go to his account, you can find all sorts of information about different research studies and easily understand some of the main findings of each study. His handle on X is @TheTranscendedMan. Not only does he share this research information with the long COVID community on Twitter/X, he also live tweeted the entire RECOVER-TLC conference on his account. By that, I mean he summarized the conference with every panel session. I got a chance to talk with John about his impressions of RECOVER-TLC, and he provides a fantastic summary of the 2.5 days. I'll hand it over to him here.
Over the 2.5 days or so, the first day was my favorite day, which is, pathobiology and all the heavy research of what's the newest findings? What are we learning? What are some of the populations that are coming out? And I think that set the tone for the whole conference, which is basically this is how I kind of summarize it. There's more details in those threads, but we kind of came out saying, this is a problem. It's affecting a lot of people in the highlights of their careers. It's affecting our children. It's affecting, our next generation with pregnancies and whatnot. It's a problem. We got to figure it out. We got to work together. We're not going to stop. We're going to find a cure, right? That to me sets the tone, and that to me is the right way to approach it. By any means, we gotta find a solution. The second thing was, we started to see all the mechanisms of how, what we think is going on. You had all the different studies such as viral persistence, microclotting, neuroinflammation in the brain, and they all have kind of a connection to each other. And we're starting to see the puzzle is really being put together, but it's still very, very complex. And so that was the first day in kind of a quick summary. And then as we moved on to the second and third day, it was kind of more of, okay, that's the picture that we want to solve. How do we go about testing and prodding at these mechanisms? And what is our kind of regulatory challenges that we have to go through? So, second day, we heard a lot from patients. We heard a lot about the initial kind of form of what trials might look like. We heard about interventions. We heard about how people can submit, ideas. And these are all in the spirit of where we need to go to, which is just listening, which is anyone can submit ideas. Science is going to have to, go through and vet which ones are worthwhile to, pursue ultimately. But we are having these ways to get that input from, patients who've been waiting years to just be heard, right? I think that was super powerful. And then, by the last day, I thought, the promise that the NIAID director kind of left off with was, it's one of the best promises you can really think of from the federal government perspective. It was very, very forward thinking. It was very inspiring to both, in my opinion, to the research community who has been, feeling unheard for a while, at least I think, to the patients who were expecting more adaptive trials faster. And, it is still hard to say, we're still in 2024 and we're only finally doing this, right? That's to me, some of those nuanced points of how do we move faster? How do we get answers? How do we really prod at these things quickly? And if it doesn't show promise, we need to keep moving.
So speaking of keeping moving, there was a fair amount of discussion at RECOVER-TLC about how to approach research. And there's a couple of things I want you to know about in terms of that. One is the active trials. Active is an acronym. The other one is the concept of adaptive trials, which John referred to. Let's start with the active trials. ACTIVE is an acronym that stands for Accelerating COVID-19 Therapeutic Interventions and Vaccines, ACTIV. This was a major reason that the United States was able to develop vaccines quickly and treatments for acute COVID. Active trials were a public-private partnership. So there was collaboration not only between federal and private sector institutions, but even within the public sphere, there was a lot of collaboration between departments. So not only was the NIH involved, but also the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, the FDA, BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. The Department of Defense was involved, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the group previously known as Operation Warp Speed. It's now called Countermeasures Acceleration Group. Several philanthropic institutions were also involved. And the idea was to fast track research by focusing on specific ideas and then acting on small research studies to determine which research focus is going to be invested in more. Once that was determined, the idea was let's do our best to fast track the next step and the next step until we come up with a treatment that's actually effective. And this really worked. There is an effort to expand active to long COVID treatment as well. And I think that's very, very worthwhile to continue pursuing. Now let's talk about adaptive research trials. Adaptive research is a type of study design, and it's in contrast to your traditional research project. A traditional research project determines the problem, the patient population that's going to be studied, the determined intervention, and the duration of time that intervention is going to be observed. Once that entire process is completed, then the researchers reflect on the results and draw conclusions. Those conclusions could be that the treatment group did as well as the placebo group and no better. It could be that the treatment group did worse than the control group, or experienced a side effect that nobody was anticipating. Either way, you take your next step after the entire research project is completed, and then if you want to study anything further, you file for another research grant, essentially, and study the next thing you're curious about as a brand new project. This kind of research feels sort of intuitively strong because it's strict. But here's the problem. If during your research you find that there was either no difference or a worse effect on the treatment patient population, your research project has to start all over again if you want to now try something based on the conclusion that you might have realized midway through the project or even early on in the project. Adaptive research trials are different, just like they sound. They have the capacity to adapt or pivot course based on preliminary data that comes in during the project. It's almost like a choose your own adventure, but much more scientific. Just like a choose your own adventure book, though, there are only a certain number of options or pathways that the research is going to go down. This allows the research study to remain scientifically sound and have the capacity to be a little bit more flexible and maybe find clinically beneficial conclusions faster than a traditional research study would. I recently got to speak with Dr. Todd Davenport, who is the chair of the Department of Physical Therapy at the University of Pacific in Stockton, California. He has spent years studying fatigue and fatiguing conditions, particularly myalgic encephalomyelitis, and he's been an active advocate for effective long COVID measurements and treatments. You may find his voice familiar. He's been on the podcast before, and I'm going to allow Todd to explain adaptive trials a little bit more.
So these are not new strategies necessarily, but I think there's a new emphasis on them because of the need to move fast. Number one, the need to test a lot of things. Number two, and also the fact that we are still learning as we go. That we can set up the best trial we can, but that we may be learning something about patient subgrouping or so forth as we go along, that we might want to make some tweaks to that study as we go forward, so that way we can preserve the validity of the work rather than having to stop what we're doing, go back to the drawing board, and start over with something completely different.
As Todd described, there was discussion of the right research methods to use, but there was also a lot of discussion about what topics to research. Repurposed drugs was one of those topics, so let's talk about that next. Drugs are already being used on patients with long COVID that do not have FDA authorization for long COVID. That is a, obvious fact at this point. And a lot of these medications benefit people with long COVID. So it makes sense then to push for FDA authorization of helpful drugs. The first step, though, is to start spending time researching medications that already exist to really evaluate whether or not they are beneficial for certain long COVID symptoms. So, which medications should we research first? An FDA representative presented the Cure ID project, which is an attempt to identify which medications seem to be working for long COVID patients. It is a database that physicians, clinicians, patients, and patient caregivers can interface with. They can both share their experiences with medications that they've used and utilize the database to find information on what other people are using. The information collected in that database can also be used to guide this specific research. So it can be a really powerful tool and one I encourage you to check out if you haven't yet. I got to talk about the topic of repurposed drugs and how they were covered at RECOVER-TLC with Dr. Alba Azola. She's an associate professor of physical medicine and rehabilitation at Johns Hopkins University. She was the co-director of the post-acute COVID team and the long COVID clinic at Hopkins. She was a presenter at RECOVER-TLC, and she talked to me about the very practical need for focusing research efforts on repurposed drugs.
I think that in parallel to the research on mechanisms and treatments that are curative for long COVID, I think it's important to also invest on the repurposed medications that can be extremely helpful for managing symptoms, specifically those that manage orthostatic intolerance, cognitive issues, which are very debilitating in our patient population. So the medical community at large has been very slow to adopt the use or prescribing of some of these medications. And patients, the millions of patients with long COVID, are struggling to find physicians that are able to provide symptomatic relief in an efficient way. Because there's resistance, right? We don't have the evidence-based guidance statements on how to prescribe this, who to prescribe it to. So I think my point is the development of a full understanding of the pathophysiology of long COVID has come, but it still needs more time. In the meantime, we have millions of people that are extremely impaired. And it's important to remember that we should invest in medical education so that we can help the patients that are suffering right now in a very expedited manner, not to decrease the importance of understanding mechanism and trialing treatments for a cure, but that those two things should coexist at the same time.
The next thing I want you to know about RECOVER-TLC is the discussion about post-exertional malaise and post-exertional neuroimmune exhaustion, PEM and PENE. These terms refer to the physiologic changes and the symptoms that occur in people with myalgic encephalomyelitis, and over 80% of people with long COVID experience after exertion. Both Dr. Davenport and Dr. Azola advocated for researching post-exertional malaise and PENE. Dr. Davenport in particular advocated in his presentation that we need to define PEM and PENE accurately in addition to making them major focal points of research. Here he is explaining.
I really hope that we take this issue of PENE seriously and really do some solid background work in order to figure out how we'll define whether we adopt the existing definition or if it needs to be tweaked somehow for long COVID, and then to decide measurement strategies related to this important subgroup that really may end up confounding the results of the whole thing if this gets ignored.
Next, let's talk about who else presented at RECOVER-TLC. There were researchers, but there were also patients and patient advocates. This was in response, I think, to the criticism that the NIH has received about RECOVER. Patients have been asking strongly to help influence the direction of research and to help identify topics for research and have been largely ignored. So almost all the panels had a patient or a patient advocate on it during RECOVER-TLC. One of those panelists was Jermaine Greaves. Jermaine has long COVID and spoke about his experience living with long COVID, another chronic illness called hidradenitis suppurativa, and a pre-existing disability of cerebral palsy. Jermaine is the founder of Black Disabled Lives Matter and was invited to speak at RECOVER-TLC and share his perspective. I was lucky enough to meet with Jermaine, and this is what he told me about his experience at RECOVER-TLC, what led to his participation in the event, and how he views the role of patients in the research process.
I got connected with RECOVER-TLC because of Megan Stone of Long COVID Campaign, and she had forwarded my information to the team at the NIH, and they loved my information and they loved my press stuff that I was doing this past year and recently. Recently, I did a story on PBS for long COVID and disability in June, so they loved that, and that's why they asked me to speak in the first place. To be honest with you, I thought the meeting was really great. I think it's a good first step in really doctor-patient research advocacy. But I think what will be better is hiring us to be on the board, putting us in your research, referencing us so that we can even go a step further, using us as reference points of what long COVID could look like. I'm somebody who has an existing disability, but still able to get some symptoms of long COVID, and I have a chronic illness. So that is another side of the long COVID experience we need to speak to, as also as I'm a Black disabled person who has navigated the medical system for my chronic diseases in the last 3 years. So we need to discuss that and bring that into the conversation and bring in the disparities that people are facing, bring in the inequities, the housing struggles, the job struggles, and the survival struggles of having a chronic condition that affects your livelihood and doesn't allow you to do the things you want to do. Because once you get sick with this, what can you do? Who are you after this and before this? And then with the interesting thing about COVID and just the conference, I think the only negative thing that I would say about the conference is that there were people that were not masked. That bothered me so much. I don't know how they could sit up there and be okay with that. That really bothered me. But outside of that, I think they did a good first step in really connecting with the real advocates who are doing the work and really talking about COVID and really on the pulse of what is happening. So I respect them for reaching out to me and everybody that was doing the public comments and sharing our stories the way that we did.
What's the outcome of RECOVER-TLC? Where do we go from here? Who should we be following now that the conference is over? I asked John Douglas this question, and these were his insights.
So, I mean, for me, I've been following the earliest works of, Polybio, but more like specifically, the UCSF group, their Link program, they got onto this really, really early, and they're using all the novel experimental type of things that are starting to really show results. I'm not going to say results, but showing the potential for results. They're using novel pet tracers to see, how your immune system is reacting constantly. They're testing antivirals, monoclonals, cancer drugs in long COVID, and that's what I would kind of expect that our federal government would have been doing, because they should be way more connected to the private public industry and also making those connections based on the urgency, if that makes sense. And so that group to me has been hitting base hits after base hits after base hits. But it's not just them. It's the whole symposium. It's folks from Yale with the IgG transfer work, showing that this is a causal link of symptoms. It's the Harvard group who are finding, hey, all that stimulation to your immune cells and whatnot, that's causing neuroinflammation as well. And that's maybe causing brain fog and all these different challenges that you have. It's all connecting. And that's why I think, science as a collaborative team sport is one of the most important things. And so I'm following that whole group. I think that they are doing the work that I wish others, either sponsored or supported more, or that the federal government, which I think now, because they're now so embedded, that they're like, hey, yeah, let's actually bring those people in. Let's actually listen to them. Let's actually, maybe even have them lead potentially some of these, maybe this platform or whatnot, because they showed, they came up and showed what they could do, right? And I think that is, crucial for this next stage of, if you had somebody like on a baseball team who always hits a base hit, you want them on your team. They don't have to hit home runs all the time. They just, you want them on your team. And I think this larger collaboration is that. And that's why I'm really excited, because that input is the most crucial thing for our future.
As we wind down, I'm going to leave you with the voices of Dr. Alba Azola, Dr. Todd Davenport, and John Douglas, sharing with us their hopes of the future of long COVID research, what work is left to be done, and why there is room for hope.
I think that looking at what they did with HIV, in terms of having dedicated funding for a long term. Right now, there's concerns of running out of funds. Are we going to get these funds? We need a dedicated block of funds for 10 years guaranteed, so that researchers that are looking into mechanistic studies have that and can be supported to evolve that knowledge and continue to progress it. Understanding biomarkers and refining what we already know in order to get those biomarkers to the clinical world, which unfortunately today we don't have it. And of course, with the growing understanding of the mechanism, the trial for treatments. And then that other pathway that I mentioned, very expedited studies that get the evidence so that we clinicians can treat our patients today. And that's going to be part messaging, right? And education of the medical community, but also expedited research that will provide that evidence needed for us to offer that treatment, helping access to these medications, which are sometimes, off-label use and not covered by insurance and not available to patients that don't have the money to pay for them. So I think that is an important piece. And that's, as a clinician in the front lines, to me, that's something that's very, fresh in my mind because I live it every day, patients that cannot try a medication because insurance won't cover it and they don't have the $300 a month that it costs to get it. So I think those would be kind of the three pathways: mechanistic, treatment for cure, and expedited research on tools that we have right now that can help the patients out there.
Man, I hope we can get a cure. Obviously we could get some effective treatments. We're past time. For the group of people who have PENE and maybe are meeting clinical criteria for myalgic encephalomyelitis, it would be great if that long COVID cure ended up helping people with ME as well. That would be a dream. And ME-like conditions, long Lyme and so forth. That's the ultimate hope. And then if we can't have that, then to have some we have some treatments that are really good to address underlying conditions to improve quality of life. I would say that would be the minimum expectation of these trials.
It's very, very hopeful. I think we're at a catalyst right now. I feel like we're at the top of a roller coaster where we're about to go back down and enjoy kind of the rest of what's going to be going on with all these trials. I keep my hope. I talk about that in my book. Hope is what is going to get me through this. And I think that everyone should have hope and know that, hopefully the cure is coming.
I want to thank everyone who participated in this episode. Like John Douglas, I am very hopeful. And like Todd and Alba, I am also aware that we have a lot more work to do. This is going to be a long path, and I do think it is moving in the right direction. I think it's unfair to expect, if not unfair, then it's unrealistic to expect that this is going to be perfect from jump. This whole process of researching treatments and a cure for long COVID. I think we need to recognize that for better or worse, this is research in the United States is likely the best bet for finding treatment. That's a big pill to swallow, but one that I think we need to keep in mind. Sorry if these metaphors don't link up, but I think you understand what I mean. I am leaving a link to the entire recording in the show notes. Feel free to watch it. They are piecemeal, available on YouTube as individual seminars, and there is an agenda available so that you can organize the panelists and have all of the names, and I'll link that agenda separately. I believe it's linked in the YouTube videos as well. Tell me what you think. Tell me what your takeaways are, and what are your hopes? What are your expectations? Who are you following? Who do you want to be more involved and present? These are a lot of really big, important questions. And as Jermaine was talking to, it's very important that research involves patients' voices and patients' needs. So it's a big project. I hope that I was able to simplify this big project a little bit. Let me know what you think. My email is longcovidmd@gmail.com. I am Dr. Zeest Khan. You've been listening to the Long COVID MD podcast. You can find me by email and on Substack, longcovidmd.substack.com. Hope you're feeling well in this moment, and if not, I hope you feel a little bit better in the next. Take good care of yourself, and bye for now.